The first thing Rosalie Finch felt was pain, not fear, not confusion, only pain. Burning, sharp, and endless. Her breaths came in broken gasps. Grit filled her mouth and blood clung to the torn hem of her dress. Somewhere behind her, the distant echo of gunfire rolled through the valley like fading thunder. She tried to move, but the moment she did, a scream of agony shot up her leg. The wagon trail was gone. Above her, the sky spun a hard, merciless blue. Faces of her students flashed in her fading thoughts, the little chalkboard waiting for her in that frontier schoolhouse near South Pass City. Then her vision blurred again. A faint cry slipped past her lips, small and weak, swallowed by the pine-covered slopes of the Wind River Range. Her bonnet lay beside her, crushed and caked in mud. Ants crawled across the fabric, but she was too weak to move them away. The last clear memory she had was of the night before, running through the darkness. Two men had stepped out from the brush, eyes wild with hunger and whiskey. The wagon driver had shouted once, then chaos erupted, gunfire, screams, confusion. Rosalie had leapt from the wagon, tumbling down the rocky bank and disappearing into the trees. Since then, everything had become a blur of pain and shadow. Now the morning sun pressed down on her like fire. Sweat and blood made her skin glisten. She touched her thigh and felt the wound pulsing under her fingers, hot, swollen, angry. Her stomach churned when she saw how deep it went, the flesh darkened and filthy with dirt. Her voice cracked as she whispered half to herself, half to the empty sky. "Please, someone." A horse snorted somewhere close by. Rosalie froze, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. A shadow moved between the trees. Broad shoulders, a weathered hat, a rifle resting across a saddle. For a heartbeat, terror surged through her. She thought the bandits had come back. Her trembling fingers fumbled for a rock, but her strength gave out before she could lift it. The figure dismounted and knelt beside her. His voice came quiet and steady, almost gentle. "Easy now. You're hurt bad." He smelled of sweat, leather, and the faint sting of whiskey. As he leaned closer, she caught a glimpse of his eyes. Blue, calm, and sharp. Her lips quivered. "My leg. It's swelling fast," she whispered. He looked down, his jaw tightening under the glare of the sun. The wound was angry and red, pulsing beneath her skin. He grabbed a canteen, poured water over his hands, and studied her face carefully. "If we don't treat this soon," he said quietly, "you won't make it past tomorrow." Her pulse raced. His words blended with the soft rustle of pine needles and the low buzz of flies circling the open wound. Far below, the Sweetwater River shimmered, beautiful, distant, and coldly indifferent. Rosalie tried to speak, but her voice failed her. One thought echoed in her mind. Who is this man? And why did the sound of his voice make her believe she might live? The sun had climbed high, burning through the thin mountain air. Rosalie blinked against the harsh light. Her lips were dry, her skin ghost pale. The man, Eli, dampened a cloth with water and pressed it gently to her forehead. "Try to stay awake," he murmured, his tone rough yet kind. "You're safe for now," she nodded weakly. "Who are you?" He glanced toward the trail, his expression shadowed. "Just a man who's seen too many bad mornings," he said quietly. His horse pawed at the dirt nearby, restless in the heat. "Name's Eli McCrae." He turned back to her wound, squinting against the sunlight. The flesh around the gash was swollen and hot to the touch. His frown deepened. "You weren't wrong," he muttered under his breath. "It's swelling fast," Eli muttered, his tone grim. Rosalie bit her lip hard as pain surged up her leg, stabbing into her chest. "Am I going to lose it?" she managed to whisper. "Not if I can help it," Eli replied, pulling a bottle from his saddlebag. The sharp bite of whiskey filled the air. "This'll burn like hell," he warned. "But it'll keep you alive." She tried to laugh, but the sound came out as a ragged gasp. "You sure you know what you're doing?" Eli's lips curved into a faint smile, the kind that carried the weight of old memories. "Used to patch up worse than this back in the war," he said quietly. He poured the whiskey straight onto the wound. Rosalie screamed, clutching at the dirt as the fire tore through her leg. Eli steadied her with one hand, his voice low and steady. "Breathe, teacher. Breathe." He ripped a strip from a red scarf, one that looked like it had traveled many hard miles, and wrapped it tightly around her thigh. Then he crushed a handful of dried herbs between his palms, mixing them with a few drops of water from the canteen. "Old trick from an army medic," he murmured. "Yarrow and comfrey. They draw the heat out." Her eyelids fluttered as her breathing slowed. "Why help me?" she whispered weakly. "You don't even know me." Eli paused. His eyes drifted toward the dark line of trees. "Out here nobody lasts alone," he said simply. "That's reason enough." He lifted her gently and set her back against his coat for support. Silence hung thick between them, heavier than the mountains rising around them. The wind carried the scent of sage and dust, and somewhere far off a hawk cried into the open sky. Rosalie's breathing steadied. Her trembling stopped, though the pain still throbbed beneath the bandage, slow, deep, alive. Eli crouched near the Sweetwater, refilling the canteen. As he turned back, something caught his eye. His expression hardened. There were tracks in the dirt, boot prints. Fresh ones. He cursed softly under his breath. Rosalie saw the change in his face, her heart quickening again. "What is it?" she asked. He didn't answer. Instead, Eli reached for his rifle and checked the chamber. His voice dropped, low and calm, a soldier's tone before a storm. "Stay quiet," he said. "We're not alone." Eli's gaze swept the ridge. "Looks like we've got company," he murmured, voice tightening with quiet resolve. He turned to Rosalie, his jaw set, the corner of his mouth barely moving. "Stay still, teacher. No matter what you hear." Then came the sound. Boots scraping against sun-baked dirt. Harsh, close. The silence shattered like thin glass. Eli froze, his hand resting light but ready on his rifle. His eyes sharpened, cold and alert. He leaned close to Rosalie, his whisper low enough to vanish into the wind. "Stay quiet. Don't move. Not a sound." Rosalie's fingers clutched the red scarf tied around her leg. Every breath sent pain flashing through her body, but she managed a faint nod. The air around them hung thick and heavy, the heat pressing down like a weight. Flies droned lazily, and the entire valley seemed to be holding its breath. Then, a voice drifted out from the trees, rough, slurred. "Hey there, stranger. Mind sharing what's in that pack of yours?" Eli rose slowly, brushing dust from his shirt as two men stepped out of the shadows. Their guns hung low, eyes twitching beneath the rim of their hats. They looked hollow, sleepless, worn, their faces cracked from sun and whiskey. Rosalie recognized them instantly, the same men from the trail. Eli's tone stayed calm, steady as stone. "Ain't much worth taking," he said. "Just a wounded woman and some herbs." "You'd best keep riding," one of them sneered. "A wounded woman, huh? That so? Maybe we'll check for ourselves." Eli's thumb eased back the hammer of his rifle. "You take one more step," he said evenly, "and you'll be limping home." "I ain't warning twice," the men laughed. But it wasn't brave laughter. It was nervous, hollow, the kind that hides fear behind noise. Dust curled between them in the sunlight. The taller one shifted his stance. "We just want supplies," he said. "Times are hard." "Don't make this worse." Eli didn't blink. "Then turn around," he said quietly, "before you find out how bad hard can get." For a moment, the world stood still. The wind sighed through the sagebrush. Then, yielding like a snapped wire, both men reached for their guns. The rifle cracked once. The sound rolled across the valley like thunder. A bullet tore the dirt an inch from their boots. The men froze, eyes wide. Eli's voice came steady, cold. "That was your warning," he said. "The next one won't miss." Something in his tone carried weight, the kind forged in war, in loss, in graves dug under quiet skies. The bandits stumbled back, muttering curses before vanishing into the tree line. Eli waited, listening until the faint echo of their horses faded into the hills. Only then did he kneel beside Rosalie again. Her eyes were wide, her chest trembling with fear and disbelief. You didn't kill them," she whispered. Eli shook his head. "Didn't need to," he said softly. "Out here, sometimes mercy hits harder than lead." Rosalie tried to smile, though her lips trembled. "You're a strange man, Eli McCrae." "Maybe," Eli said softly, his voice carrying the weight of dust and years. "But you're still breathing, teacher. That's what matters." The wind shifted, bringing with it the mingled scent of sage and gunpowder. The sun sagged low, spilling gold across the rocks and pines. Rosalie leaned her head back, eyes closing for the first time since the ambush. For a fleeting moment, she felt the faint pull of safety, fragile but real. Eli kept watch, rifle in hand, his gaze fixed on the darkening tree line. He knew this wasn't over. Somewhere in those woods, danger still crouched, patient, breathing, waiting. Men like that didn't scare easy. Hunger and whiskey did things to a man, twisted his mind worse than fear ever could. And out here, desperate men always came back. "If you're still with me, pour yourself a warm cup of tea, partner," Sit back and tell me down in the comments, what time is it where you're tuning in from? And if you haven't yet, go on and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next in this wild western tale. By late afternoon, the air hung heavy as wet wool. Clouds gathered over the ridges, low, dark, and threatening. Eli sat beside Rosalie, gently wiping her forehead with a damp cloth. Her skin burned hot with fever, her lips pale and trembling. The swelling in her thigh had crept higher, the flesh drawn tight and red. He saw it and knew. Infection, he muttered under his breath. If I don't cut it soon, she's done for. Rosalie stirred, her eyes fluttering open. What are you saying? She whispered. Stay still, Eli said, voice steady as stone. I've got to drain it. It's the only way. Her hand shot out, gripping his arm with surprising strength. Will it hurt? Eli met her gaze, clear, honest, unflinching. Yes, he said, but pain's better than dying. He took a long breath, poured whiskey over the blade of his knife, then held it to the fire until it glowed a dull, angry red. The sharp scent of hot metal and smoke filled the small camp. Rosalie turned her face away, whispering a broken prayer under her breath. Hold on, teacher, Eli murmured, his voice barely above the wind. You're stronger than you think. Then the knife touched skin. Rosalie screamed, the sound tearing through the canyon like a wounded bird. Eli's jaw clenched tight, his hand steady even as sweat rolled down his temple. The blade did its work. A thick yellow stream of infection spilled out, mixing with blood and dust. He cleaned it quickly, pressing the crushed herbs deep into the wound, then wrapped it tight with fresh cloth torn from his own shirt. Her eyes fluttered open for a moment, unfocused, glassy, lost, before drifting shut again. She wasn't awake, not really. Caught somewhere between fever and pain, her breath came shallow, her skin cold. Eli sat back, chest heaving, eyes locked on her pale face. Minutes dragged by like hours. The wind whispered across the canyon walls, and slowly, mercifully, her breathing steadied. The fever eased. She was still alive. Eli let out a long breath and leaned against the rocks, wiping the sweat from his brow. For a fleeting second, the world was still. Then came the sound and a sharp crack, the snap of a twig. His eyes narrowed. Boots shuffled against the dirt, he swore under his breath. Those same two men, they hadn't gone far. They'd circled back. Eli moved fast. He snatched up his rifle, checked the chamber, and slipped behind a boulder. The men crept closer, whispering in low, hungry voices. Finish the job, one muttered. The horse, said the other. It's our only way out. Ain't no food left at camp. Eli waited, silent as stone. When one of them stepped into the open, Eli kicked a loose rock. It clattered down the slope, echoing off the canyon walls. The man spun toward the sound. That was all Eli needed. Two sharp cracks split the air. One bullet tore into the dirt by their boots. The other snapped a branch clean above their heads. The men stumbled, panic twisting their faces. They slipped on the wet alkali sand near the river, falling hard as the current hissed beside them, the same sound it had made for 100 years, watching men fight and fail. Eli was on them before they could stand. The rifle's butt cracked against one man's jaw. He grabbed the other by the collar and slammed him to the ground. The struggle ended fast, brutal, final. He tied their wrists tight with rope, breathing heavy. You're done now, he said, voice low and cold. There's a deputy in Lander who'll know what to do with you. The men spat curses, but Eli didn't hear them. He was already walking back toward Rosalie. She lay where he'd left her, the light of the setting sun brushing her face. Soft, peaceful, alive. He knelt beside her and whispered, You're safe now. But even as the words left his mouth, the wind changed, carrying a new sound, hoofbeats, distant, slow, and steady. Getting closer. Eli's hand found his rifle again, his eyes on the horizon. Was it help at last? Or another kind of trouble? By dawn, the world was calm again. The storm had passed in the night, washing the land clean. The air was sharp, bright, and still. And the hoofbeats Eli had heard, they weren't bandits this time. They were lawmen, a patrol from Lander led by Deputy Howe. They took the two outlaws away without much talk. Deputy Howe said they'd been riding the ridge since dusk, following the trail of fresh boot prints and the echo of two rifle shots rolling through the valley. Justice out here moved slow, slower than the wind or the river, but it still moved. Eli stayed behind to tend to Rosalie. Her fever finally broke with the sunrise. When she opened her eyes, he was sitting by the fire, his hat tipped low. the red scarf folded neatly beside her bedroll. "You didn't leave," she whispered, her voice dry but steady. He looked up, a small, weary grin tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Didn't have anywhere better to be," he said. For days he stayed with her, feeding her broth, changing her bandages, talking just enough to keep her mind clear. Between the silences she learned things. That he once had a wife and a son, both lost to fever long ago. Since then he'd been a wanderer, patching fences, tending wounds, helping strangers who crossed his path. She listened, and somewhere deep inside something shifted. Pain recognized pain. Weeks later, when she was strong enough to stand, Eli rode with her to South Pass City. The little schoolhouse stood crooked on a hill of wild grass, paint peeling, bell rusted but still there. Eli helped her down from the horse, his hands rough yet gentle. "This where you start over," he said. Rosalie looked at the empty windows, then at him. "We both start over," she replied softly. He stayed a while longer, built her a porch, mended the fence, even carved a small wooden box to hold her chalk and books. Each morning before the children arrived, she would see him near the gate, sipping coffee, pretending to fix something that didn't need fixing. And every day he left before the bell rang. No promises, no big words. Just presence. The townsfolk began to whisper that the wanderer and the schoolteacher were keeping each other alive. Maybe they were right. By autumn, the hills turned gold again. Rosalie's limp had faded, and Eli still stopped by with supplies, sometimes with a story, sometimes just to sit beside her in quiet. One evening, as the sun bled out behind the mountains, she handed him a cup of tea. "You know," she said, smiling softly, "I never did thank you properly." He smiled back. "You're alive. That's thanks enough." They sat together in silence, watching the last light fade, and for once neither of them felt alone. Out here in the West, people learned that kindness could save as surely as a gun, that justice wasn't always loud, and love didn't always need to speak. So maybe that's the real question, partner. Between law and mercy, between survival and love. Which one would you choose when no one's watching? If this story touched your heart, give it a like. Share it with someone who still believes in quiet heroes. And subscribe for more tales from the wild heart of the American West. Now pour yourself a warm cup of tea, lean back, and tell me in the comments, what time is it where you're listening from, and what did this story make you feel?